Welcome to the Tea of Life podcast, where our mission is to transform every attitude of life by encouraging and equipping you to live the life you love and love the life you live. I am your host, Tiffany Thompson. Hey, and welcome to this episode of Tea of Life podcast. I am so happy that you have decided to join me. Today, I want to encourage you that you are enough. There's this idea going around that says that we are not enough. There are those who think that when we say, I am enough or you are enough, that it is simply not true, and they just cannot believe it about themselves. Well, I feel like that I am here to tell you today that you are enough and that having self-worth is not evil. In fact, it is how Jesus sees us. One of the many things that I have learned during my time in counseling is to see myself the way that Jesus sees me. Whenever I think bad thoughts about myself or someone says something to me or about me in an unloving spirit, I ask myself, but what does Jesus say? And I can tell you now that he would never tell us that we are not enough. As Christians, we believe that Jesus is enough, and if Jesus lives inside of me, then that makes me enough too. Because I am a mom, I feel like I can think about this from a parent's point of view. I would never tell my child that he is not enough. I can tell you that I did have a mom who did tell me that, and it doesn't feel that great. Unfortunately, I did believe it and operate in that untruth for a really long time, but then I learned that Jesus would never tell me that, and that in him, who is also in me, I am enough. I could never pass that down to my own children. They are enough, and I cannot imagine a loving Heavenly Father who is way better at being a parent than I could ever dream of being, could or would ever tell me that I am not enough. I think that I've shared before that I really started to see the love of God and how God looks at us when I had my first son. It was then that I began to really, but only slightly, because I don't know that I could ever completely comprehend how much God really and truly loves us. But it was then that I began to see that I could never look at my kids and say, there is nothing good in you. You are not enough. I believe that the love, forgiveness, and compassion that I have for my kids is very small compared to what Jesus has for us. Ephesians 2:10 tells me that we are God's handiwork. Do we really want to believe that God is perfect and we are God's handiwork, yet we are still not enough? Psalm 139:13 and 14 says that God created my inmost being and knit me together in my mother's womb, and I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I want you to know that we are not deprived of the love of Christ. Christ has loved us since the beginning of time. There is nothing that we can do to make God love us more or even less. Some people begin their faith walk with the fall in Genesis 3 and totally skip over Genesis 1. But we have to start in Genesis 1. We have to remember that in the beginning, God created people in his image. God already knows us, everything about us, and even loves us, even before we acknowledge him. If he begins to see us the moment that we accept him, then that would mean that he wouldn't know that we existed before that. In Jeremiah 1:5, God said to Jeremiah, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." This means that God knew him before he was even knitted in his mother's womb. And I don't think that that was reserved for only Jeremiah. I am confident that this applies to all of us as well. What would your life look like if you began to walk in this truth today? What would your relationships with those around you look like? Last week, I talked about how back in 2006, God called my husband and me away from our home church and moved us to another church where he began to show us his love and mercy in a whole new way and a whole new level. The pastor and his wife there were truly amazing, and they loved people as I had never experienced before. Because of this, God also began to open my eyes and heart to the love that he has for his people, because God is a good father. And I can tell you that concentrating on God's love for me caused me to want to become sinless more than concentrating on my sin itself. We began to sing songs about God's love and not songs about our sin. They were truly joyful and uplifting and not demeaning or contradicting to God's love for us. They were very mindful about the songs that we sang. Our words have power, and the words that we sing in our songs have power, maybe even more power, because how many times do we get a certain song stuck in our head? We don't typically repeat an entire speech by heart, but we can repeat every line to a song we heard 20 years ago. I learned that God is not trying to catch me in my sin, as in, aha, gotcha. No, he is absolutely not. He will catch me when I fall and not kick me when I'm down. What God thinks about us is vastly different from what we think of us. Some of us think that God sees us as helpless sinners, dirty, sinful, wretched beings, and that is not true at all. I don't believe that God is in heaven whispering to Paul or Abraham, "Look at that wretched girl. She thinks she's enough, but she's not." These are things that people say about us, not God. But maybe we have put some of those people above God, and that's why we listen to them instead of what God is really saying about us. Listen to just some of the things that the Bible tells us that God thinks of us. Luke 12:17 tells me that I am valued. Joshua 1:9 tells me that I can be strong and courageous. 1 Peter 1:9 tells me that I am chosen. Colossians 3:12 also tells me that I'm chosen. 1 John 3:1 tells me that I am a child of God. Psalm 139:14 says that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And then verse 17 tells me that His thoughts toward me are precious and many. Ephesians 2:4 and 5 tells me that I am loved by God with a great love, even through my sin. Matthew 5:14 tells me that I am the light of the world. John 15:15 says that I am a friend of God. Romans 8:31 says that God is for me. Ephesians 2:19 says that I am not a stranger, but a member of God's household. Romans 8:37 says that I am more than a conqueror. There are still times in my life that I need to remind myself what God thinks about me, pretty much every single day. My mind can truly go out of bounds with the things that are not true, and I have to reel myself back in with the truth and transform every attitude that I may have about myself or even God. I'd like to address here that being enough does not mean to never try to be something more. We need to keep striving, keep moving, keep growing, keep trying to become better humans. We should always try to be better, move forward, and love big. I don't believe that there is ever a time that we should settle in our enoughness. Lastly, I'd also like to say that I try to make it a habit to ask my kids, "But what does God say about you?" I want them to also know this truth, and recently I've had the privilege of asking my kids' friends, "What does God say about you?" And it has been super powerful and caused them to think and begin to change their attitude as well, even those who don't yet acknowledge Jesus. So today, I'd like to leave you pondering this question. What does God really say about you? And how can living in this truth transform every attitude you may have about yourself and your life? Thank you for listening to TF Life Podcast. If you have two friends who need to transform every attitude of life, tell them about us. Also, right now, before you forget, go to Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to a podcast and hit that subscribe or follow button. That way you will never miss an episode. Thanks for listening to TF Life Podcast, and we'll see you next time.